Welcome to the Jersey Justice Podcast, featuring your hosts, attorneys Gerald Clark and Mark Morris.
Chris, you talked about with the talc, and that's just a powerful, fascinating story, true story. I heard, like in the asbestos litigation, that they knew for years that asbestos was bad, but they kept selling it, kept marketing it. Can you talk about that at all in terms of, you have this story about talc kind of, hiding, the results of those Rhode Island talc cases. But can you talk even before that in terms of asbestos itself and when the industry knew that it was killing people and what they did when they first found out about that?
Well, it's interesting. The first asbestos cases were actually bought in the 1920s.
Wow.
Dock workers?
In England. The first known asbestos case was a woman by the name of Nellie Kershaw. Nellie Kershaw was a factory worker who brought a case against a company called Turner Brothers. I remember the history because I traveled to London to take depositions.
Wow.
And I found letters from her to the company, saying that she was malnutrition and she was dying, and it was heartfelt. And by the 1930s, there were cases filed in the United States. There were cases filed against Johns Manville in the United States. And right here in New Jersey, it was the center of the controversy at the time. And those cases actually started the whole workers' compensation system. Because back then you could sue your employer. And what they did was they went to the legislature and they had it wiped out. You couldn't sue your employer anymore. You could only go to comp. So people who were filing cases were filing them against the employer. It was gone. Now you could only go to comp court. And that's really how it started, 1935. And we have documents where we found in the files of Johns Manville that says, the less said about asbestos, the better off we are. Everybody has to die of something. It might as well be what we're making. I mean, that's in the files.
That's along the lines of those memos with the cigarette companies and Joe Camel saying we got to get the kids hooked to replace the
People who are dying from smoking.
Yeah. So people don't even know this, but the first modern day product liability case ever filed in the whole country, modern day, was filed in a Newark, New Jersey courthouse in 1958. And it was an asbestos case. The man worked for a contractor called Porter Hayden, and he had developed asbestosis, but really bad asbestosis. That's the scarring of the lung where it's almost like they put a girdle on your lung and you can't breathe. And he took the stand in the Newark courtroom, this man. And after he testified in a courtroom, and we had the memos, they had a meeting in the Johns Manville boardroom that night because he sued Johns Manville, which was the first time anybody since the 30s, when they thought they shut it all down, that they actually sued a third party for a products case. And so we got the minutes of the board meeting one night after this guy testifies. And they said, well, we got to shut this down. So they settled with the guy the next morning. And again, they put the settlement on the record in the courthouse saying he had COPD.
Wow.
Something other than asbestos. And they buried that for another 10 years.
Yeah.
Right? So then the next asbestos case didn't come out until 1968, the Burrell case. So again, and you know why? Again, under a confidentiality order.
Right.
So then what happens is all these construction workers, powerhouse workers, shipyard workers are exposed for another 10 years, right up to the early 1970s, all as a result of secrecy agreements. Right? And you probably don't know this, but there's a Monmouth County lawyer who's a friend of mine, lives actually 4 doors from me. His name is Steve Waka. One day you should have him here.
Yeah.
Steve Waka was a union organizer, and he actually worked for the OCAW and fought to have OSHA passed. And he was a driving force to have OSHA passed.
Wow.
So there would be warning labels and people would be protected in the work environment.
Yeah.
Wow.
And he was actually, I don't know if you remember the movie Silkwood.
Yeah, it sounds familiar.
He
yeah.
was featured in the movie Silkwood.
Yeah.
I think they were coming to kill him. At the time, he was a union organizer. He eventually became a lawyer.
Wow.
They've written books about him. I know and he lives right here in Monmouth County.
Wow.
Right? But I'm just saying, this is a lawyer who started as a labor organizer and changed the course
Yeah.
of occupational history
Yeah.
in the whole country.
Yeah.
And he's right here, 2 miles from here, still here.
It's just crazy. Now, I don't mean to keep going on this this sort of soapbox or whatever. I don't know if that's the right word, but like when I was like, lawyers, they're money hungry, money hungry, coming up with dumb arguments, screwing the country, and really what we're doing, at least in our thing, is these are profound stories. These are social justice stories. And they're all real. And it's real stuff, and I feel like that kind of view I had of lawyers it wasn't just by happenstance. It was a concerted PR campaign against lawyers so they can keep on doing things like making asbestos and marketing cigarettes to kids and not moving the Ford Pinto gas tank to the middle of the car and leaving it at the back because it would cost more money to move it to the middle in a safe area than it would to defend and pay lawsuits. So,
Yeah, it's the Brady Bunch episode, dropping the briefcase, and it's a frivolous lawsuit.
Yeah.
And
But, the civil justice system has made America safer. There's no question about it. You could look around any room, any factory, go to a showroom where you're going to go buy a car.
yeah,
So,
it's just a scary world too, where you have major companies saying this is safe, this is fine, and then it comes out that it's not. And information like that is because it's more profitable. It's not shared. And with things that like as precious as I know you've done a lot of work with like baby powder cases where people were getting sick from that. You had a really big verdict, right? I think it was like the largest punitive damages verdict in New Jersey relating to a baby powder case. But things is like
even
intimate.
a blind squirrel could find a nut once in a while.
Yeah, well, but really, just the things that you think of something as innocent as precious as a newborn child, and it's like, well, this is potentially harmful, or this is harmful, and profit wins out over safety and practicality and what's best for the country. And so people like you, attorneys like you, that work those cases, that expose those things, like you're talking about, that's what makes a difference, because at some point, profitability is not going to be winning out when the public image gets out there of what's happening, when these lawsuits have to get paid out and things. So I think that's a huge kind of service that we do.
But we have the chance to change things even on a small. This is what's so great about, the opportunities that we're given. So I'll give you an example. I had a case maybe 3 or 4 years ago. Woman, I got a call from a state senator, said, could you see this woman? And I said, yeah, sure, whatever you want, Senator. I'm happy to do it. She needs your help. So she comes into my office, and she's from Newark. And she's telling me the story about her living conditions in this tenement housing in Newark. And then she turns around and she shows me, she's got on her phone, she shows me a video on her phone of rats climbing over her daughter's dolls.
Oh,
And she's being evicted because she refuses to pay rent until they get the rats out of her apartment. Forget the drug dealers at the door and the leaky pipes. That's a whole different part. So I said, okay, well, we'll see what happens here. So we go to landlord-tenant court in Newark.
probably busy.
Right? Busy place. The lawyer, the defense lawyer comes in and he drives up in a Corvette. And the Corvette has on the license plate the evictor.
Oh my God.
The defense attorney?
Yeah, that's the license plate, the evictor. And he comes in and he's got more gold than I got in my whole house on his neck, on his wrists.
Yeah.
And they think they're just gonna ramrod this woman out. So my associate stands up, says, "No, I'm here to represent Ms. Cortez, you know, we're contesting habitability, and so what we end up doing is they don't get Ms. Cortez out, the evictor goes home, and then we file a class action on behalf of Ms. Cortez and everybody else in the apartment. We have mold inspections done. The place is full of toxic mold.
Oh man.
We have videos of the drug dealers at the doors. We have pictures of all of the mice coming up and down. And we then involve the Seton Hall Law Clinic, so we get a bunch of kids involved. Right, we're getting the kids involved, so now they're in the middle of...
You don't want to go to Rutgers?
What?
You say you don't want to go to Rutgers?
I thought I've had a cool career and done some cool stuff. Now I'm feeling like completely inadequate.
We file this class action. They contest it, and we end up forcing them to clean up the entire building and 2 other buildings that they owned. The people got their money back for the rent they paid. And Ms. Cortez now lives in a really nice neighborhood in Toms River.
Oh, that's great.
With her little kids, and those are the things that we can do.
Yeah.
As at a micro level, it doesn't have to be a national class action. I mean, we can change. We have the ability to just change neighborhoods.
That's not a micro level for Miss Cortez. That's more important than take a big national issue.
Right.
For her, it's a big deal. That's wild.
Yeah,
that is. And you're right. That's something that you get kind of, I don't want to say lost in like the work. You just, you got your handful of cases. You're so focused on working your file. But you're right. When you step back, what we're doing is making like life-changing differences for people. Because what you said, you talked about, and Jerry pointed out, you're like, oh, this wasn't a big thing. This was some small-scale thing. Are you kidding me? All those people that live in those apartments, like the Miss Cortez that you talked about, that's a life-changing thing for her. To have rats crawling over her kids' toys and to get that remedied, and then, some guy, you're right, just showing up like the evictor, thinking he's going to walk all over probably.
Because that's what happens.
Yeah. Some pro se.
Until somebody walks in and says, no more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow. I love that too, because I look at your, again, doing a little bit of homework, you've got, multi-billion-dollar this case, you've got, millions and millions of dollars for this settlement, that one. And the time we're spending, you're talking about helping, some lady in Newark not get evicted and get her apartment cleaned up. That's something that you think of in this setting to talk about, that you can do as an attorney.
We have these things like, I spent a fair amount of time doing work with returning vets, helping them find jobs. And because a friend of mine is just a wonderful human being, Colonel's Fair, who also lives in Spring Lake. And in opening doors to help people find jobs. I have some of those guys have come to work with me, and now are lawyers. Who those are opportunities that being a lawyer presents. You think that if I was just some guy who couldn't open a door or didn't know 5 people to call, that I would be able to help people the same way? I might try as hard, but it does give you, a platform of credibility if you're sincere about it, to do things in your community, and I think that's one of the great things that we can do, as we can change our communities. I really believe that.
I mean, it gives you a platform of credibility, but more importantly, as an attorney, it gives you power. It gives you power to actually do it. If you have the money and the resources.
Access to a system, I feel like that's so foreign to so many people. The example I think of about that is, my background was I worked a year for the prosecutor's office in Monmouth County. I grew up, my dad was in law enforcement. He was a police chief the town I grew up. So that's what I always thought that I wanted to do. I wanted to be on the prosecutor side of things. And Jerry talks about the benchmarks and things. I can remember going against a pro se litigant. He was appealing a municipal court conviction, and he was challenging that, the ampules on the radar that they used to catch him speeding weren't calibrated correctly. And the judge is just like, sit down, sir, convicted, you lost. And I just was like, great, I beat this. It just wasn't for me. And I think it's a phenomenal career. I think a lot of people have a passion for that and a calling to it. But it just wasn't something that was entirely for me. And I think just kind of pulled a you, which you haven't done in a while, and lost my train of thought with where I was going with that. What were we talking about right before?
Well, I think, following your heart is a big thing.
You're right. And now I remember. I apologize. I'm too young to be having these senior moments.
You sound like me.
But so then, because I had that criminal background a little bit, every once in a while I would take a municipal court case on, which that's not really a huge area of practice for us. But just walking into court as an attorney in municipal court, it's, oh, Mr. Morris, how are you? Come on, we'll get you in with the prosecutor. And if you're just a general member of the public, they're lined up there, holding their kid, like, hey, excuse me, I'm just trying to, and they won't give you the time of day. And I don't necessarily agree with that, but it's talking about having access to a system and, just the power to make a difference. Just showing up in a suit and, having Esquire behind your name was something that, in the example I think of, is I remember it was before marijuana was legalized. They had everyone who had a marijuana charge against them stand up. And they're like, all right, what are you doing? Guilty, not guilty, conditional discharge, and a conditional discharge. People who don't know, it's basically it's dismissed, conditioned on you not getting in trouble for a year. And so they're going down the line. The people that have attorneys are like, not guilty, not guilty. They get to this one kid, younger kid, and he's just like, I'm guilty, Your Honor. And he's like, are you sure? He's like, yeah, I'm guilty. I had marijuana on me. I apologize. And he's like, well, you're eligible for a conditional discharge. And the kid was like, I don't really know what that is. I'll just plead guilty. And he's like, let's someone go talk to him. And this poor kid, this guy was just going to be like, yeah, sure, put a drug conviction on my record, having known. And that judge really did him a solid. But my gosh, it's just just having a little bit of knowledge, just having access to the legal system, and it just gives you that opportunity, I think, to do things that a lot of people kind of can't. But so again, we're I don't have $30 million verdict settlements and things to my name, but it's funny that we sit around here. We're not talking about these big cases that we had. I'm talking about seeing municipal court stuff.
Yeah, but I think it's touching the people. It's, those come and go, and they're nice for a resume, but the difference you make day to day in somebody's life, the people you touch, that's what matters at the end of the day.
I've got to say too, having worked here, Jerry, this isn't like a strategized thrown over to you, but I've seen you do that and kind of created that culture here too, where if there's a public interest thing or something that comes up where you feel like there's a wrong that needs to get righted, that you are not shy about jumping up and saying, hey, you know what, I've got multi-million-dollar cases to work on, but I'll hit pause on those so I can help out, with this issue.
Chris, did you have a BASF case or something recently that resolved or something?
That was the Talc case.
That's the Talc case.
Yeah.
And that was a case just for one person?
That one was the one where we bought the case for all the people who were had their
That one.
rights
Wow.
taken away.
Wow. And is that done now? Is it over?
Yeah, it's settled. Everyone got paid.
So what's going on with is there other talc litigation in the country with Beasley Allen or something?
Yeah,
and
well,
they're trying to.
I'm in the middle of that battle.
What's that case about?
Those are people who developed ovarian cancer
Right.
from using the product, and that's a it's a battle
Right.
to end all battles. It's that's really fighting small countries.
That's like a battle
So,
royale.
and we fought through already 2 bankruptcies. There's going to be another one, I'm sure, filed in the next few weeks. And I know more about bankruptcy law now than I ever want to know.
Sorry to hear
but you walk into court and there's literally 10 law firms on the other side. With that's what you're dealing with.
We I always say this, that like what we do, it's really war and battle on paper.
Yeah.
And you take like in Ukraine, you have the drones, and the drones were just causing havoc.
Yeah.
Now they have countermeasures to the drones, and then they say, well, with the drones, artillery is gonna go out of become obsolete, kind of like swords have become obsolete. Can you talk a little bit about over the years the different tactics and countermeasures that have taken place? So, for example, when you talk about the first case that was brought in Newark, and the guy was able to testify, sounds like he probably didn't even have an expert, and then they settled the case the next day. What roadblocks have industry put in place in terms of needing experts and raising the bar to prove these cases? Like, what kind of roadblocks have been put in place? Because you say, well, there's 10 lawyers and there's, it's like fighting a small country. I'm talking about Daubert and experts and making you jump through even more hoops to prove that there's linkage and all that. Can you talk about how that's evolved over the years?
Well, it used to be that one of the things they would do is try to keep the experts away from you, right? They would, and you've seen this in your cases, I'm sure, where there's 3 great experts, and they go out and talk to them all and pay them each $1,000 so you can't talk to them.
Right.
That used to be the old tack. It's still out there, but that was the old way where they took experts away from you. I think it still happens in MedMal, by the way, medical malpractice cases. Then, the fight was, okay, you found a great expert, but your expert's not qualified, or your and so we've gone to the Supreme Court multiple times on what is an expert allowed to say, what kind of data can the expert rely upon, what kind of background do they need. So they fight those battles. Most of the time we win because, I'm the eternal optimist.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I think the judges want to do the right thing most of the time.
Yeah.
And most of the times we win. Now we're in a whole different level. Now you see litigation where the experts are actually being sued by the companies, saying that what's in their published medical article isn't true or isn't factually accurate. And and that's to try to tamp down and make them not want to testify.
Oh.
And that battle's going on in New Jersey right now, right? Where the companies are literally suing the experts. I'm in the middle of a battle right now in federal court where one of the companies is fighting because they want access to go into the expert's lab. You know, usually the expert gets to go in their laboratory, do whatever they're going to do, write up their report. Right? Now they want to go into the expert's lab and look at the same microscope they're looking at the same time. I mean, it's all, you know, intimidation. And then you've also seen, you know, how they go after them to try to just take their incentives away. So it's, you know, these are hard-fought battles.
So people, let me just say this. So people understand this, what's going on, because what's the audience for our show here? The audience is anyone that wants to hear it. So people understand this. You can't bring these cases without an expert. And I'll just give you a super simple example. I just read it in the case reports today. A person had an auto crash. They got injured. It was time for trial. And in order to prove an auto crash case in New Jersey, you have to have a doctor testify that you're injured, that you have a permanent injury. The lawyer showed up to court for the trial. The lawyer didn't have the $10,000 to $15,000 it will cost to have the expert come to court, to have the doctor come to court. The client didn't want to pay the money, so the case got thrown out. So people understand this. They talk about they're going to bury you in paper, they're going to wear you down. So that case, justice was probably not done in that case because they couldn't afford the $5,000, $10,000 it would cost to bring the doctor in. Okay, so when you talk about Chris battling big pharma, multiply that by millions and millions. So you know, another example. So, you know, someone gets killed from allegedly from talc, or someone allegedly gets killed from asbestos. You know, my wife says this all the time. She's like, well, why are they doing that? Why don't they just pay? They obviously this happened. And be like, because, honey, America, it doesn't work that way, okay? You know, the framers of the Constitution, you know, when the American Constitution, you know, you had rights as long as you were a landowning male. You had the right to vote. So the country was based on money and power. And we see it every day in these cases. And when Chris, you know, multiply that by millions of times. So it's not about necessarily getting to the bottom of did the talc cause this or not. It's about drowning the other side and wearing them down so that justice is ultimately not done, so that we can keep doing what we're doing. And I'll just give everyone another example in cases I've read about. When you have a drug gets invented and it gets approved by the FDA, and then the generic drug maker wants to come in, a small drug maker wants to come in after the time passes so that the generic can come and then compete. The major drug maker will sue the small drug maker and allege copyright and trademark infringement on the drug itself, and just bury them in a lawsuit just to prevent that company from
making it more affordable.
Yeah, to make the drug more affordable. So this is the stuff that we deal with. It's crazy. It's a never-ending. What's the thing? Sisyphus with thing.
Sisyphus rolling the boulder up.
Rolling the boulder up the hill, and it's a never-ending battle.
Yeah, because I had written down, Chris, one of the questions I had in these cases that you've got going on, like the talc, the asbestos stuff, where we sit here and it seems like that's one of those things where the medicine, the science, I'll say allegedly, but is pretty clear that asbestos, bad. Asbestos gets you sick. Asbestos, you know, can kill you. Where the science and the medicine seems to be so, I'm sure it's not, and this is my maybe naivety with it, that it's bad. Like that, how do those cases then get defended? Is it just on a causation basis where, oh, this could be from anything? Or is it, because that's why I was particularly interested when you talked about the science and medicine now trying to get discredited, where they're like, oh, this expert that relied on this, well, we're now taking this peer-reviewed medical article down and attacking that. Is like, what do you see with how these cases are now defended?
Well, they're mostly defended on it's hard to defend the conduct, right?
Yeah.
So they defend the cases two ways. They used to try to defend by making the plaintiff look bad. That never worked. Right, so they kind of stopped that at this point. So now mostly it's on medical causation. You know, did the product cause this injury? And it's going to keep coming up. You see it now in these PFAS cases. That's the next thing coming. But for example, you know, even in an asbestos case, well, he was exposed to this kind of asbestos. That's the nice asbestos. He wasn't exposed to really bad asbestos. He was exposed to the chrysotile asbestos. That's the nice asbestos. The really bad stuff, he wasn't exposed. And they'll actually play that out in court because they need, and then you'll go in there and then you have to fight that whole battle. Or, you know, you'll fight, is there asbestos in the makeup? And we'll have a huge fight about, you know, what does the microscope say? I was in a deposition for 2 days last week. Well, they brought in a microscopist from China, you know, who was going to say that our doctor did it wrong. So, you know, it's really at the micro level.
Yeah.
Literally anything to just kind of, you know, throw up the roadblock and slow you down.
Because I remember growing up, like either my high school or one of the schools, they were like, "Oh, we're doing renovations to the school, and there's asbestos in it,"
Right.
so, and everyone was like, "Oh no, there's asbestos in the school."
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
you know, just thinking about how I feel like it's one of the few instances maybe where a jury gets seated, where they're thinking kind of like, "Well, we know that stuff's bad,"
Right.
and then the defense is kind of just poking holes and poking holes.
And then they go after the lawyers,
Yeah.
you know,
I read-
in the trials.
I read something. You got locked out of your hotel room mid-trial.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we were in trial, and we went back to the hotel, and we couldn't open our door, our war room door. So we went downstairs and we said, "What's the deal here?" And we thought there was like an electronic problem.
Yeah.
They said, "Well, the defendant exercised their right. You can no longer stay here." They bought out the floors.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And, you know, because they had their mock juries 2 floors up from where we were staying, they didn't want their mock juries to see us.
Wow.
I mean, that's the level that it's, you know, thought it actually happened.
I've heard stories. I've heard stories about guys being on trial and investigators going through the garbage of the law firms. You know, I don't know if that's, but you know that.
Yeah.
I guess that's when paper mattered. Paper's not a big deal. Let's take a quick
Sure.
break.
Yeah.
Take a break.